November 12, 1936. War Ministry, Paris. Colonel Henri Dubois spread a map across the mahogany table in the operations planning room. 15 generals and staff officers leaned forward, studying the colored arrows he'd drawn across Belgium and northern France. "Gentlemen, I've completed the war game you requested. Germany will not attack the Maginot Line." Several officers smiled. The Maginot Line was impregnable. 280 miles of concrete fortifications, artillery casemates, and underground railways. 3 billion francs invested. The finest defensive system ever constructed. Dubois continued, his finger tracing a route through the Ardennes forest. "They will invade here, through Belgium. Mechanized columns will reach the English Channel in 7 to 10 days, isolating our northern armies and rendering the Maginot Line strategically irrelevant." General Alphonse Juin, Chief of Staff, lit a cigarette. "The Ardennes is impassable for armor, Colonel. Gamelin himself has said this. Your scenario is impossible." 4 years later, Dubois would watch his prediction unfold with mathematical precision. If stories of courage and ingenuity move you, please like and subscribe. Every subscription helps us honor the memories of those who served. Henri Dubois was born in Lyon, 1894, the son of a railway engineer. His father built bridges across the Rhône. At dinner, the elder Dubois would sketch force diagrams on napkins, explaining how water finds the path of least resistance, how structures fail at their weakest points, how engineers must think like the enemy they're defending against. Henri attended Saint-Cyr Military Academy in 1912, graduating just as the Great War began. He served as a junior officer at Verdun, where he watched German artillery pulverize French fortifications for 303 days. The lesson was clear: static defenses could be overcome. What mattered was mobility, reserves, the capacity to respond. After the war, Dubois joined the Army General Staff, specializing in strategic planning and operational analysis. He studied every major campaign since Napoleon, building statistical models of breakthrough operations. By 1930, he developed a reputation as the staff officer who could predict enemy movements with unsettling accuracy. When France began constructing the Maginot Line in 1930, Dubois was assigned to the Defensive Planning Division. He spent 6 years reviewing blueprints, analyzing placement, calculating fields of fire and artillery coverage. The fortifications were magnificent. Each fortress a self-contained underground city with hospitals, barracks, ammunition magazines, even narrow-gauge railways connecting positions beneath the earth. But something troubled him. The line stopped at the Belgian border, 250 miles of frontier left exposed. Official doctrine claimed this was acceptable because Belgium was an ally, and fortifying their border would be a diplomatic insult. The French High Command also believed the Ardennes forest provided a natural barrier. "Tanks cannot pass through dense woodland," General Maurice Gamelin stated in 1933. "The terrain itself is our fortification." Dubois requested permission to conduct a war game testing this assumption. In November 1936, his request was approved. He was given access to intelligence on German armor doctrine, road networks through Belgium and the Ardennes, and French deployment plans for the northeastern frontier. What he discovered would haunt him for 4 years. The strategic situation was absurd. France had spent 1/4 of its military budget building impregnable fortifications along the German border. Then they deliberately left 250 miles of frontier, the Belgian approach, essentially undefended. The official reasoning was threefold. First, Belgium was an ally with treaty obligations. Second, fortifying the Belgian border would signal French mistrust, and potentially push Belgium toward neutrality. Third, the Ardennes forest was supposedly impassable for mechanized forces. Dubois studied the terrain. The Ardennes was heavily wooded, yes, but it contained road networks, river valleys, and natural corridors. In 1914, the Germans had moved infantry through these same forests. Modern mechanized forces would move faster. He obtained reports from French military attachés in Germany. The Wehrmacht was developing combined arms doctrine, tanks, motorized infantry, and close air support operating in coordinated columns. They called it Bewegungskrieg, War of Movement. German exercises in 1935 and 1936 practiced rapid breakthrough operations, with armored spearheads punching through defensive lines and racing deep into rear areas before defenders could react. The French response was methodical battle, slow, deliberate advances with overwhelming artillery preparation. Mobility was sacrificed for firepower. The entire doctrine assumed enemies would attack predictably, giving French forces time to concentrate reserves and counterattack. But what if the enemy didn't cooperate? What if Germany simply drove around the Maginot Line through Belgium? Dubois compiled casualty statistics from the Spanish Civil War, where German and Soviet armor were being tested in combat. Tanks were surviving encounters that would have destroyed them a decade earlier. Improved engines, better armor, new tactics, mechanized warfare was evolving rapidly. The impassable terrain of the Ardennes might not stop a determined armored thrust. He studied French deployment plans. Most of the Army's mobile reserves, the best divisions, the mechanized units, were positioned near the Belgian border, ready to advance into Belgium if Germany invaded. This made sense given Belgium's treaty obligations. But it also meant these forces would be racing forward into Belgium, leaving their supply lines stretched, right as German armor might be breaking through the Ardennes behind them. The mathematical problem was elegant. If Germany invaded Belgium, French forces would advance to meet them. If Germany simultaneously broke through the Ardennes, French armies would be caught between two German forces, one in front, one behind, with their backs to the sea. Encirclement. Destruction. It was so obvious that Dubois initially assumed he'd made an error. He checked his calculations 3 times. The conclusion remained inescapable. Germany's optimal strategy was not to attack the Maginot Line at all. They would simply bypass it through Belgium, and France would be defeated in weeks. November 1936. Dubois worked 18-hour days in his office at the War Ministry, constructing his war game. He used actual French and German divisions, real road networks, documented movement rates for mechanized columns. German forces, 136 divisions, including 10 panzer divisions. French forces, 94 divisions, plus potential Belgian and British reinforcements. Terrain, 1 to 50,000 military maps of Belgium, the Ardennes, and northern France. The game assumed Germany would violate Belgian neutrality, as they had in 1914. Dubois positioned German forces along the Belgian border in 3 army groups. Army Group B would invade the Netherlands and northern Belgium, drawing French attention. Army Group A, the strongest, with 7 panzer divisions, would drive through the Ardennes. Army Group C would demonstrate against the Maginot Line without attacking. He gave Germany modern equipment and doctrine, concentrated armor, air support, rapid exploitation. He gave France its actual doctrine: methodical battle, dispersed armor in infantry support roles, centralized command requiring approval for major movements. The war game ran for 3 weeks. Dubois moved unit markers across maps, calculated daily advances, tracked supply lines and casualties. He assumed French intelligence would detect German concentrations before invasion, but would not correctly interpret where the main effort would come. Day 1. Germany invades Belgium and the Netherlands. Belgium requests French assistance per treaty obligations. French forces begin advancing into Belgium. Day 2. 7 German panzer divisions cross the Belgian border south of Liège, entering the Ardennes. French intelligence reports armor in the forest, but estimates it's a feint. The main effort must be the obvious attack through central Belgium. Day 3. German armor clears the Ardennes faster than expected. Poor roads slow them slightly, but not enough. French mechanized reserves are 50 miles north, advancing into Belgium. Day 4. German panzers reach the Meuse River at Sedan. They cross against light resistance. French defenses here are second-line units, older reservists, because everyone assumes the Ardennes protects this sector. Day 5 to 7. Breakthrough. German armor races west toward the English Channel. French High Command finally understands the threat, but mobile reserves are out of position in Belgium. Orders to counterattack take 24 to 48 hours to transmit through the centralized command system. Day 8 to 10. German panzers reach the Channel coast near Abbeville, cutting Allied armies in two. Northern Force, French First Army, British Expeditionary Force, Belgian Army, is trapped in a pocket against the sea. Southern Force cannot break through to relieve them. Day 11 to 15. Encircled armies attempt to evacuate through Channel ports. Some escape, many surrender. Day 16 to 30. German forces turn south, attacking remaining French armies from the rear, while Army Group C finally engages the Maginot Line from the front. Fortifications designed to repel frontal assault are useless against attack from behind. Day 40 to 46. France requests armistice. The Maginot Line surrenders without having fired a shot in its own defense. Dubois stared at the final map. The entire campaign took 46 days in his simulation. The Maginot Line, 3 billion francs, 6 years of construction, touted as impregnable, never mattered. Germany had simply driven around it. He wrote his report with mathematical precision. Dates, unit movements, casualty estimates, strategic conclusions. On November 12, 1936, he presented it to the Army General Staff. General Gamelin listened politely, then dismissed the scenario as theoretically interesting but practically impossible. The Ardennes was impassable. Germany would not violate Belgian neutrality so blatantly. And even if they did, French mechanized reserves would counterattack before breakthrough succeeded. Dubois filed his report in the War Ministry archives, where it gathered dust for 3.5 years. 5:35 a.m. Dubois was shaving when his telephone rang. The duty officer's voice was tense. "Colonel, Germany has invaded Belgium and the Netherlands. General Dumont requests your presence at GQG immediately." Grand Quartier Général, French Army headquarters, was located in a chateau near Vincennes. Dubois arrived at 0645 to find organized chaos. Staff officers clustered around wall maps, marking red arrows as intelligence reports arrived. The arrows showed German forces crossing into Belgium along a broad front from the Netherlands south to Luxembourg. General André Gaston Prételat, commanding the Second Army Group, was already implementing Plan D, the predetermined response to German invasion of Belgium. French mechanized divisions were advancing northeast into Belgium to meet the threat. The British Expeditionary Force was moving up on their left, everything according to doctrine. Dubois studied the map. The pattern matched his 1936 war game exactly. Obvious attack through central Belgium drawing Allied attention, while he traced the southern markers. German forces were also crossing the Luxembourg border, entering the Ardennes. "What strength in the Ardennes?" he asked a junior officer. "Unclear, Colonel. Reports are confused. Perhaps 2 or 3 divisions. Probably a screening force while the main effort develops in central Belgium." Dubois felt cold certainty. Wrong. That is the main effort. 7, perhaps 10 divisions. Mechanized. They'll reach the Meuse in 3 days. The junior officer looked skeptical but said nothing. Dubois requested permission to brief General Gamelin on the Ardennes threat. Permission was denied. Gamelin was occupied with the developing situation in Belgium. The German advance through Belgium was rapid but not catastrophic. French and British forces were taking up positions along the Dyle River, exactly as planned. Reports from the Ardennes remained fragmentary. Dense forest made aerial reconnaissance difficult, and French forces in that sector were limited to cavalry screens and second-line infantry. Dubois reviewed incoming intelligence through May 11th and 12th. Civilian refugees reported long columns of German armor moving through the Ardennes. French cavalry screens reported contact with German mechanized units and withdrew. Radio intercepts suggested extensive German armor operating south of Liège. On the evening of May 12th, Dubois prepared another brief for General Georges, commanding the Northeast Front. The brief estimated 7 German panzer divisions in the Ardennes, potentially more, moving toward the Meuse River between Sedan and Monthermé. He recommended immediate redeployment of mechanized reserves south to block the expected breakthrough. General Georges reviewed the brief, considered it, then declined. "Our mobile reserves are committed to Belgium, where the main German effort is developing. We cannot weaken our northern front based on speculation about the Ardennes. The Second Army is holding Sedan. They will contain any crossing attempt." Dubois thought about the Second Army. Series B divisions, older reservists, World War I veterans in their 40s and 50s. Good men, but not equipped or trained for the war of movement that was coming. And behind them was the gap, the 250-mile section where the Maginot Line ended and Belgian fortifications were non-existent. 5 a.m., reports from Sedan. German armor has reached the Meuse. Heavy Luftwaffe activity. French artillery under air attack. 8 a.m., German infantry crossing the Meuse at multiple points. French defenders holding but taking casualties. 2 p.m. Breakthrough at Sedan. German armor has crossed the river. French counterattacks by Second Army reserves unsuccessful. By evening, the situation was clear. General Heinz Guderian's 19th Panzer Corps, 3 divisions, had crossed the Meuse and was exploiting west. To the north, Erwin Rommel's 7th Panzer Division had also forced a crossing at Dinant. The French defensive line along the Meuse had been punctured in at least 2 places. Dubois stood in the operations room, watching staff officers move unit markers. The red arrows advancing from Sedan looked exactly like his 1936 war game. Mathematical precision. Every prediction accurate. General Georges authorized counterattacks by French armored reserves, but these units were dispersed in infantry support roles and would take 24 to 48 hours to concentrate. Dubois had calculated in 1936 that this delay would be fatal. By the time French armor counterattacked, German spearheads would be 50 miles west, too far and too fast to catch. The German breakthrough accelerated. Guderian's panzers raced west through the gap in French lines, covering 30 to 40 miles per day. French attempts to establish blocking positions failed. By the time units moved into position, German armor had already bypassed them. On May 15th, Prime Minister Paul Reynaud telephoned Winston Churchill in London. "We have been defeated. We are beaten. We have lost the battle." Dubois watched the disaster unfold with the detachment of a man observing equations solve themselves. On May 16th, German armor was at Montcornet, 60 miles from Sedan. On May 17th, they reached Saint-Quentin. On May 18th, Cambrai. On May 19th, Amiens. French mechanized reserves, the best divisions France possessed, were in Belgium, 100 miles north. British Expeditionary Force was also committed in Belgium. The entire northern Allied force was now threatened with encirclement as German panzers raced for the Channel coast. Dubois tried to brief General Gamelin on May 17th. The meeting lasted 4 minutes. Gamelin looked at him with the exhausted expression of a man confronting the consequences of years of bad decisions. "Your war game, Colonel, from 1936. "Yes, General." 7 to 10 days to the Channel, you predicted." "Yes, General." "Today is day 8. They are at Cambrai, perhaps 30 miles from Abbeville in the coast." "Yes, General." Gamelin was silent for 20 seconds. Then, "Why did we not listen to you?" Dubois had no answer. The mathematics had been clear, the strategic logic obvious. But institutional momentum, political constraints, and cognitive bias had overwhelmed rational analysis. France had built the wrong defense against the wrong threat, and now 150,000 soldiers would pay the price. General Guderian's 2nd Panzer Division reached the Channel coast at Abbeville. The Allied Northern Armies, French First Army, British Expeditionary Force, Belgian Army, were cut off, trapped in a pocket between Guderian's forces to the south and Army Group B advancing from the east. Dubois was reassigned to evacuation planning. The Allied Northern Force would attempt to withdraw through Channel ports, Boulogne, Calais, Dunkirk. The Royal Navy was organizing an emergency evacuation. How many could be saved was unknown. Over the next 10 days, 338,000 Allied soldiers evacuated through Dunkirk. The French First Army fought rearguard actions to cover the withdrawal, then surrendered. Belgium capitulated on May 28th. The British Expeditionary Force escaped but lost all its heavy equipment. With Northern Allied armies destroyed or evacuated, Germany turned south. Army Groups A and B attacked remaining French forces from the rear, while Army Group C finally launched limited attacks against the Maginot Line from the front. Not serious assaults, just demonstrations to pin French forces in place. The fortifications that were supposed to stop Germany performed exactly as designed. They stopped frontal attacks perfectly. But they were useless against threats from the rear. Maginot Line garrisons found themselves surrounded, cut off from supply, tactically irrelevant. On June 14th, German forces entered Paris. On June 17th, Marshal Philippe Pétain requested an armistice. On June 22nd, 44 days after the invasion began, France signed surrender terms. Dubois was in Bordeaux when the armistice was announced. He retrieved his 1936 war game report from his files and reviewed it. His prediction, 46 days to French defeat. Actual result, 44 days, 2 days difference. Mathematical precision. The Maginot Line never fired a shot in defense of France. Garrison troops waited in their underground fortresses, manning artillery pieces that faced the wrong direction while Germany conquered their country from behind. On June 25, 1940, French forces in the Maginot Line received orders to cease fighting. The fortifications had not been captured. They had simply become irrelevant. Over the following weeks, German forces occupied each fortress. Engineers studied the massive installations with professional admiration. The fortifications themselves were magnificent. the strategy that depended on them had been catastrophic. Dubois was offered a position in the Vichy government's military planning staff. He declined. Instead, he remained in unoccupied southern France, living quietly in a village near Lyon, working as a mathematics tutor for local students. In October 1940, he was visited by a German intelligence officer, a colonel from Wehrmacht operations planning. The officer brought documents, Dubois' 1936 war game report, recovered from French Army archives in Paris. "We found this remarkable," the German colonel said. "You predicted our entire operational plan with extraordinary accuracy." "How?" Dubois shrugged. "Basic mathematics. You had superior mobility. We had static defenses with an obvious gap. The solution was trivial." "Your generals did not think it was trivial." "No, they did not." The German officer studied him. "You could have prevented this. If France had listened to you, deployed forces differently, our invasion might have failed." "Perhaps. Or perhaps institutional inertia was too great. Militaries tend to prepare for the previous war, not the next one." The German left. Dubois never saw him again. In 1942, Dubois made contact with local resistance networks. His skills in logistics and planning proved valuable. He helped coordinate weapons drops, plan sabotage operations, analyze German patrol patterns. The same mathematical precision that had predicted France's defeat in 1936 now helped resistance fighters strike German occupation forces. He survived the war. Liberation came in August 1944, almost exactly 4 years after France's surrender. American forces advancing through southern France found Dubois working with local Maquis units. The Americans asked if he wanted to rejoin the reconstituted French army. He declined. He'd had enough of generals who didn't listen to mathematical logic. He returned to teaching mathematics in Lyon, where he remained until his death in 1967. France was not the last nation to repeat the mistake of static defense against mobile offense. In 1941, the Soviet Union built extensive fortifications along its western border, the Stalin Line, assuming Germany would respect the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. When Operation Barbarossa began on June 22, 1941, German mechanized columns bypassed or simply drove through Soviet fortifications. The pattern repeated: immobile defenders, mobile attackers, rapid breakthrough. Soviet forces suffered 4.5 million casualties in the first 5 months. Later that same year, the British in Malaya assumed Japanese forces could not advance rapidly through dense jungle. The Japanese advanced down the Malay Peninsula in 70 days, repeatedly flanking British defensive positions by moving through terrain the British considered impassable. Singapore, Britain's Gibraltar of the East, heavily fortified against naval attack, surrendered on February 15, 1942, attacked from the landward side it was never designed to defend. In 1944, Germany built the Atlantic Wall, extensive coastal fortifications from Norway to southern France. Allied planners studied the defenses, then chose to attack at the one point where fortifications were weakest: Normandy. German forces were positioned to defend against obvious targets like Calais. D-Day succeeded because the Allies bypassed or overwhelmed static defenses, with mobile forces landing where they weren't expected. The pattern was consistent across theaters and armies. Static defense thinking versus mobile offense produced predictable results. Defense lines could be bypassed, outflanked, or simply overwhelmed by concentrated armor and air power. The only effective defense was mobile defense, counterattacking enemy breakthroughs with mechanized reserves before penetration could be exploited. Post-war military theory absorbed these lessons. NATO doctrine during the Cold War emphasized mobile defense in depth, with armored reserves positioned to counterattack Soviet breakthroughs. The Soviets adopted similar doctrine, planning breakthrough operations with mechanized exploitation. Both sides recognized that the Maginot Line approach, pure static defense, was obsolete. But variants of the mistake persisted. In 1965 to 1973, American strategy in Vietnam included the McNamara Line, electronic sensors and strongpoints along the DMZ and Laotian border intended to prevent infiltration. North Vietnamese forces simply infiltrated through gaps or overwhelmed the positions with concentrated force. Static defense against mobile infiltration failed, just as it had in France 25 years earlier. In 1991, Iraq built extensive fortifications in Kuwait, assuming coalition forces would attack frontally. Coalition forces bypassed the fortifications with a sweeping flanking maneuver through the desert, cutting off Iraqi units and destroying them from the rear. The pattern repeated: static defense, mobile offense, rapid defeat. Dubois' 1936 war game demonstrated a fundamental military principle: mobility defeats static defense. Fortifications can delay, channel, or complicate enemy movements, but they cannot substitute for mobile reserves capable of counterattacking breakthroughs. The lesson was proven in France, repeated in the Soviet Union, Malaya, Vietnam, and Iraq. Yet armies continue to build fortifications, draw defensive lines, and assume terrain features will stop determined attackers. The mathematics of military operations hasn't changed since 1936. German planners studied French defenses extensively before 1940. They knew the Maginot Line was formidable, perhaps impenetrable if attacked frontally. Luftwaffe reconnaissance photographed the fortifications. Intelligence officers analyzed French deployment plans, noting the concentration of mobile reserves near Belgium. The operational concept that became Fall Gelb, case yellow, was developed in several stages. Initial plans assumed Germany would attack through Belgium, similar to the 1914 Schlieffen Plan. But General Erich von Manstein, Chief of Staff for Army Group A, proposed a modification. Concentrate the main armored effort through the Ardennes, not central Belgium. This was exactly the scenario Dubois had wargamed in 1936. Von Manstein's logic was straightforward. French doctrine expected the main German effort through central Belgium. Therefore, French mobile reserves would advance into Belgium to meet that threat. If Germany instead concentrated armor in the Ardennes, where French defenses were weakest, the breakthrough could reach the Channel coast before French reserves could redeploy. Hitler approved the modified plan in February 1940. 7 panzer divisions, the bulk of Germany's armored strength, were assigned to Army Group A for the Ardennes thrust. Army Group B would conduct the obvious invasion through Belgium, functioning as a decoy to draw French attention north. German planners understood the risk. If French intelligence correctly identified the main effort in the Ardennes, and if French mobile reserves counterattacked immediately, the breakthrough might fail. But they assessed, correctly, as events proved, that French command structure was too rigid and slow to respond effectively. The campaign succeeded beyond German expectations. French doctrine, command paralysis, and misallocation of mobile reserves combined to produce catastrophic defeat. The Maginot Line, which French planners had expected to anchor the entire defensive system, never mattered. As one German staff officer later wrote, France built a fortress and forgot to guard the doors. Dubois lived quietly in Lyon after the war, teaching mathematics at the Lycée du Parc. Students knew him as the gentle professor with the slight limp, war injury, they assumed, though he never discussed it. He taught algebra, geometry, and calculus with methodical precision, occasionally using military examples to illustrate mathematical principles. Imagine you are defending a river line, he would tell students. The enemy has 10 divisions. You have 6 divisions and fortifications. Where do you position your forces? Students would typically suggest spreading forces evenly along the river. Dubois would shake his head. Wrong. Even distribution assumes the enemy attacks evenly, which he will not. He will concentrate forces at one point, achieve local superiority, break through. You must position reserves to counterattack the breakthrough. Defense is not about holding everywhere. It is about maintaining mobility to respond to threats you cannot predict. The students didn't know they were learning the lesson Dubois had tried to teach the French army in 1936. In 1964, a young historian researching the 1940 campaign discovered Dubois' 1936 war game report in military archives. The historian interviewed Dubois, who confirmed the report's authenticity but declined to discuss it in detail. "Why do you think your warning was ignored?" the historian asked. Dubois was silent for nearly a minute. Cognitive bias, institutional inertia, political constraints. The Maginot Line represented a massive investment, financial and psychological. Admitting it was strategically useless would have required abandoning that investment. Easier to believe the Ardennes was impassable than to accept we had built the wrong defense. Do you think France could have won if they'd listened to you? Won? Probably not. Germany had military advantages beyond strategy, better tanks, better doctrine, better air support. But we might have avoided catastrophic defeat, fought to a stalemate, maintained a defensive line long enough for Britain and potentially America to intervene effectively. The war might have been very different. The interview was published in 1965. Dubois died 2 years later, largely forgotten except by military historians studying the fall of France. His 1936 war game report is now taught at military staff colleges as a case study in failed institutional foresight. The Maginot Line still stands. Portions are open as museums, where tourists walk through underground galleries, examining the massive gun turrets and steel doors. The fortifications are impressive. Exactly as designed, they would have stopped any frontal assault. But Germany never attacked them frontally. 3 billion francs, 6 years of construction, 280 miles of fortifications. Surrendered after 44 days without firing a shot in defense of France because the war was lost elsewhere, in places France had assumed were too difficult for armies to traverse. Henri Dubois predicted this with mathematical precision in 1936. He showed French generals the exact route Germany would take, the timeline they would follow, the strategic consequences that would result. They didn't listen. 46,000 French soldiers died, and France fell in 44 days. Mathematics doesn't care about institutional prestige or political convenience. Neither does war.